Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning. So we've managed to get connected well.
Good. Yeah, all good, all ready for you, mate.
Yes, so let's get cracking. So firstly, the traditional question, the trademark question, what do you think makes a good coach, and what's your typical session? What does your typical session look like?
So I think the first thing I would say about about what makes a good coach is they've got to understand why they're there and why they're coaching, understand the context and the role that they've undertaken, and make sure that everything that they do reflects the goals and reflects the requirements, make it appropriate for the environment that you're working in. So I think that's the first thing. If a coach really understands why they're there in the first place, I think that helps. From there, I think you need to be very organised. Like anything else in life, being prepared to do the job thoroughly and properly, and having plans on plans. So if things change, you have another plan. The more time that you can spend planning, I think the less you need to worry about the logistics of a session. And then ultimately, obviously, it's about improving players' appreciation of the game and enjoyment of the game. And I think if you get those two elements right, then you'll progress both individuals and teams. In terms of the typical session for me, I guess, to hark back to the point I just made, that there is no typical session because it very much depends on the environment within which I'm coaching. But in general, being prepared, ensuring that arrival activities are ready, that players don't have dead time. So when they arrive, they realise that as soon as we cross the white line onto the training ground, then there's activities that are organised for them, and that their role is to participate and get the most out of the time that they have on the training pitch. In terms of the way that the session flows, I think there was probably a time when I probably talked and intervened too much in sessions, whereas I think these days, or in recent times when I've coached, I've preferred to allow the sessions to flow, allow mistakes and chaos to occur if it needs to, because I think that helps the learning. But I think most important thing is that I need to be checking on all of the individuals who are in the session and understand, do they understand what they're doing? Are they enjoying the session? And do we think we're going to get the outcomes from the session that we need to? And as a result, a typical session from me might not always might not always finish exactly the way that I'd initially intended it to. But that's where your planning becomes in, because if things change, then you need to have, as I say, plans on plans to be able to adapt as the session progresses.
100%. And we all know that you're a national team head coach, former national team head coach. Can you talk us through your journey in coaching? When did you start? How did you get into football? And what made you reach a position of being a national team head coach?
Sure. So I played. I grew up in Guernsey in the Channel Islands, and then moved to the UK, where after being the captain of my university, I progressed into non-league football in the UK at quite a high level. I played there for a number of years, which was a great experience for me. Helped me understand the game at a very competitive level, where the stakes are significantly higher. So I think once I started playing at that level, then I stopped being as much of a fan of the game, because you view the game very differently when you're playing in front of reasonable crowds each week, when you're traveling quite a lot, when the stakes are so high ultimately. I did coach while I was at university. I coached in soccer schools to earn money whilst I was studying, and started my coaching badges at that time. But then while I was playing, I didn't do a great deal of coaching for a number of years. But when I finished playing, I naturally progressed into coaching, partly because as a player I was the voice on the pitch. I was a leader. I was a central defender, often was the captain of the teams that I played in, and I had, I guess, a position of authority, or assumed a natural position of authority, and I felt like coaching was quite a natural vocation for me to progress into. I did some work in the Channel Islands with a club side over there to start off with, as a kind of player coach and an assistant manager. Then I moved to the UK, left the Channel Islands, and coached at various clubs in the UK in the non-league game, sometimes with development squads, so under 21s, under 18s, and then also first team football. But the opportunity to become Guernsey's national team manager, and you know, I need to say here that Guernsey's not a FIFA nation, so I sometimes get a little bit you know, imposter syndrome when people talk about team manager, because you know, I was effectively the manager of a team that represented a small nation, and I was very lucky to play for Guernsey. As a young child, I used to go watch them, and as almost everyone in Guernsey did back in those days. But it was a huge privilege. But the role itself, I was approached by the Guernsey Football Association. I was living in the UK, but travelling to Jersey, actually, to a neighbouring Channel Island quite regularly for work. And because there's no kind of FIFA games programme, there's a limited number of games, and on top of that, I also knew the players. It was a difficult situation from a I guess it was almost like a diplomatic role in some respects, because there was some conflict between the local clubs and a new club that had been set up to play in the UK Pyramid, and it made sense for me to take the role, and I was honoured to do it. I did it for 2 years, both years in which we won the Marathi Vase, which is one of the oldest one of the oldest international competitions in the world. Goes back to the early part of the last century, and yeah, it was a huge honour to do. But it was a very different role to what some people might imagine it to be. I ran a few training camps. We built a staff that included majority of the staff were based in Guernsey. I would fly across there to take a few sessions, to watch a couple of games, and to prepare ultimately for the Marathi Vase, which is the pinnacle of Channel Islands football. And as I say, the 2 years that I was the manager, we won. Although, you know, I have to say that at the time there was a very special group of players, and whilst it was a huge honour, and I'd love to take more credit than I deserve, it was absolutely a case of, in many ways, just having a steady hand on the tiller, being organised, making sure that we had the right people in the right roles, and the players themselves, you know, did the vast majority of the work. Tactically, I didn't rebuild the team. I didn't have to do weeks and weeks of work on the training ground to implement my own philosophy, because it made sense for me to adopt a lot of the work that had been done at their club, within the club side that was playing in the UK, and the majority of the players came from making a few tweaks and ensuring that the players were in the right mindset, that the logistics were all organised, and that on match day, during the game, managing the game. And it's quite an interesting role, to be honest, Ryan, because there is no other scenario I can think of where you're so focused on winning one football match against Jersey. I mean, it's a you know, there are thousands watching. It's a big pressure, I guess, on the players, on everyone who's involved, but it's also a huge privilege. And in that game, you're 90 minutes, you're 120 minutes, or however long it takes. There is literally only one thing that matters, and that's winning the game. So there are no development themes there, really. Of course, there's always development themes in coaching. You bring players to one side. If you're talking about the preparation, you're asking them to implement the game plan. But ultimately, it's all on winning one game, which, you know, I can't think of many other instances in football. Because even if you think about, you know, what I would call real international managers, you know, let's use, you know, Gareth Southgate as an example. Ultimately, he's planning over a much longer period of time, and he's trying to implement a game model, and he's trying to develop players and influence players to become more effective within that game model over time, over various training camps, over 15, 20 fixtures per annum. And I was literally focused on one result in one game, and it's quite a pressure cooker atmosphere, but I loved it because you know, it was a huge privilege. My passion for Guernsey and all things related to the island of Guernsey is huge. It still kind of gets the hairs up on the back of my neck now, thinking that I had the privilege of doing it, that I had the privilege of playing for Guernsey as well. So yeah, that was my pathway there. Yeah.
And just to confirm, you have a 100% win record with the nation, right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, which is like I say, the team had a 100% win record. we as a coaching staff just put them out there, and they went and did an incredible job. And Jersey's a bigger island, just over 100,000 people. Guernsey has about 65,000 people a population. So as a result, logically, you would assume that Jersey would start as favourites. Now, at the time, I have to be honest, Guernsey, I think, had the benefit of a team playing in the UK, and it was a big advantage at the time with a special group of players. That said, they had played in the second season. They got promoted from I think step 5 in the UK pyramid to step 4, and they played 20 games in 34 days in the run-up to the Marathi Vars final, so for their club side. So I then had a very, very difficult job of trying to balance the work that we did on the training ground. I felt that they physically were at their limit. And it was a very difficult balance, because if you allow players in that situation to just switch off and relax completely, they probably drop adrenaline levels, conditioning levels to a point, and mentally they drop to a point that's very difficult to bring them back up again. And we had to keep them up, and in the kind of training sessions in the run up to the game, there was a very fine balance, because they were already, to be perfectly honest, exhausted from such a long run of games and lots of travelling. I mean, it's a flight from Guernsey to the UK to play in their games, obviously. So they had a lot of travelling. They had a lot of games to play in that time. And medical specialists and sports scientists would advocate that that's dangerous. Ultimately, the games program they had, but I still had to work with the staff and the medical staff, the masseurs, the physio. We had an incredible team, and they worked around the clock to get the team into shape for match day, and the players performed admirably. We won 2-1. We went 2-0 up, and I would say the last half an hour we had nothing left in the tank, and we just set the team up to defend probably the final third of the pitch ultimately, and I had a lot of confidence in the players on the pitch, and the confidence in the organisation, the responsibility, the mental capability of the players to concentrate in that moment and to see the game out. And they did admirably. They did an incredible job given that background. So it was a special day.
Well, despite the challenges, you are successful, so that's what matters. Now, you're from England, you're from the UK, but you've spent a lot of your time in Spain. You're coaching in Spain. Now, how did you adjust to a new culture, new language, and what made you move to Spain?
So initially we moved, my wife and I and our children, we moved to give the children the opportunity to learn a new language, to live in a different culture. So my day job, I work in the cloud communications industry and telecoms, and it didn't really matter where I was based. I could be based anywhere really, to be perfectly honest, because it's a global role. So what my wife and I discussed was the potential to move here for a year, to give the children the opportunity to learn the language, and then to see how things went. As it was, after about 4 or 5 weeks of living here, we kind of looked at each other, and we're just outside Malaga, and we realised this is a wonderful place, a wonderful opportunity for us to build a life in a different country. And here we are 6.5 years later. It wasn't a football decision. I knew that there would be opportunities from a football perspective at some stage, but I had to do things in the right order. And ultimately, the family comes first, and my career, and ensuring that we put the right model in place, because I've never been able to earn. I've never been able to commit to earn the same money in football as I've been able to earn in my career. It's been a huge disparity, and that's even bigger in Spain, because football in Spain, there's less money in coaching and playing over here than there is in the UK, significantly less, to be perfectly honest, if you compare it with similar levels in the UK. So I knew that I wasn't going to be able to just give up my career and become a football coach full time. So I had to work out the best way to try and balance everything. And about a year after we moved here, I started to coach, probably less than that, actually, maybe 7 or 8 months. But I started to take sessions at the football club in the town where we lived, which is just east of Malaga. It's a place called Rincon de la Victoria, and our club is CD Rincon, Club Deportivo Rincon. At the time, the club was a Tercera league team, which at the time was the fourth tier of Spanish football. But a great setup, really nice, lovely stadium, a really good, really strong kind of youth program. And once I started to get to grips with the language, which 6.5 years later I'm still doing, it's always a challenge because I work in English. We speak English in the house, so the majority of my time I'm still speaking English. But I adapted and gradually built up enough of a vocabulary and a capability to deliver sessions for various teams within the club. So that might have been the second team, the under-19s side, the Juvenil team, the Cadete, the under-16s. And then I did guest sessions and supported coaches at the club for the first few months I was here. And then coached two teams. So the Alavin side, which is under-12s, and I did that for 18 months, and then for another 18 months I coached the under-16s, so the Cadete team, which was an amazing experience, and it really helped not only to develop me as a coach, but also to develop our life in Spain, because you become part of a community. The parents and families of some of the players, most of the kids are local, a few travel from a little bit further afield, because it's a good club, but the majority of them fairly local. The town is about 50,000 people, so a lot of the key people in the town, and the whether that's policemen or teachers or professional people who live in the town, I may have coached their children or supported them as a family, and that's helped us to integrate into the community here, which has been a big help to the way that we enjoy our life here.
So it sounds like you've had quite a variety in your Spanish experience. Now, in the UK, you've worked mainly with men's football, with senior teams, with adults. In Spain, you've worked with youth players mainly. So now, what are the differences you've observed, and any tips you give to coaches who are making the transition from youth to senior or senior to youth?
It's a great question. I think I would encourage anyone to do it, whether you're a youth coach who wonders what it's like to coach senior players, or a senior coach. Even very seasoned, very experienced senior coaches. I think unless you've spent time on the grass with a group of 9 or 10-year-olds who have very different needs from both a footballing and a teaching and a mentorship perspective, then it's very difficult to round off some of the rough edges that you might have as a senior coach. And I was like that. I came from a football environment that was quite hard, it was quite results focused, it was quite a ruthless environment. And as such, I think anyone who I coached in my years in the UK will probably bear testimony to the fact that I'm quite direct, and I hope that all the players I've coached over the years would recognise that I wanted the best for them, and that I had a caring side to me, but I also had a fairly hard-nosed side to me that meant that the messages that I delivered, I felt like they needed to be stronger than they actually needed to be at the time, and that's also part of my development as a coach and as a human being. But yeah, I would encourage anyone to do it, because when I started coaching over here, first of all, I had a language barrier, which was a concern. Or not a concern, but a challenge. And second of all, I didn't have a strong an understanding of child psychology as I do now, in terms of the mentality of the players, how the performances and the concentration levels that would vary so much in one session, let alone one season. And so to be adaptable, to be approachable, to have different styles of communication, the importance of body language, the importance of eye contact, the importance of also supporting young players and their families off the pitch as well. I think if you have time, Spain has the system here is quite intense. So 3 sessions a week generally, which is quite a lot, particularly with the weather being quite hot here. And you don't have a huge amount of time and contact time with them outside of the training ground. But what I felt was really, really important was to try and understand where challenges might have laid out outside of the footballing context. So for me to talk to the parents, talk to their brothers and sisters, talk to their teachers even, to understand, why is XYZ player, having these problems? Are you experiencing? Do you see this pattern of behaviour that I'm seeing on the football pitch? And, is there anything that we can do and work together? And I think these approaches, it's ultimately about becoming a more empathetic coach and understanding that you can connect with players and you can develop players as human beings to the benefit of their football. So football and life are intertwined. A lot of our greatest experiences as players, as coaches, within the football environment have held us in good stead and prepared us for the challenges that we face elsewhere in life. And I think you have to take your responsibility seriously. And as I say, what I learned from going from senior to youth coaching and junior coaching is that you have to try and find different ways to communicate with players. You need to be adaptable, and you need to add more strings to your bow, so you become more of a layered coach, I suppose. And I think that then benefits you also when you go back up. And so when I've taken sessions with seniors after that experience, I've realised that I'm able to spot perhaps, and spot issues, and I'm more empathetic towards the players, their needs, than I perhaps was. At one stage, I had a very fixed mentality of what I wanted to deliver, and they needed to fit with my plan. Ultimately, life doesn't work like that, and I think if you can understand how to connect with players in a number of different ways, rather than just simply being quite direct in your communication style, I think it ultimately builds a stronger pathway for the players.
Well, I mean, I like that you spoke about psychology and communication. These are so important, so massive in coaching. Now, talking about psychology, you have been in the role of a caretaker manager. Now, that's something very interesting to me. I've never really got my head around it. Now, and you have been a caretaker manager for 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. Now, how do you go into a role knowing that you have not signed the players, knowing that you're just there, there's an expiry date to when you're going to be, for how long you're going to be there. So what psychology factors play in over here when you go into such a role?
It's a great question. And it's something that interests me a great deal, Ryan. I don't think people talk about very much. Perhaps it doesn't happen, a great deal in the game, particularly lower down. But this was at a club that I played at. I was running the under-21 setup and really enjoying that. And the first team manager got sacked. And yeah, there was an opportunity. I mean, ultimately, I think I would have been, I would have done the job permanently. I would have been given the job permanently if I was able to do it. But the commitment required, the travelling, was just simply more than I could commit to at the time. The children were very young. I had a busy job, and I wouldn't have been able to do it properly. So, but to answer your question, I think the most important thing when you're a caretaker manager is very, very quickly to identify the key people that are still left in the club. So, you might have a kit man, a physio, you might have support staff within the coaching setup that have very, very clear understanding of where some of the challenges were. You wouldn't be there if there were problems. I think that's the first thing to acknowledge. You're not going to go into a happy camp. You're not going to go into you're not going to go into an environment that's without its issues, whether that's within the changing room, whether that's on the football pitch in terms of the balance of the team, whether it's simply that you're facing a difficult challenge. The budget of the club was probably bottom 6, I would say, at the time, and that was where they were. And in fact, I think they were probably bottom, maybe second bottom. But we couldn't match the top teams, like I say, for budget and the quality of players. So you've got to find different ways to address it. And I think once you've listened as much as you can to the key people, you don't have time to spend days and days and days doing that, but you do have a window of maybe 48 hours before the first training session where you've got to be on the phone. I mean, managers spend an awful lot of time on the phone. I'm sure you do, Ryan, in your capacity over there. And I spent so much time speaking to the chairman, speaking to, like I said, the backroom staff, speaking to one or two of the players that I knew, and very quickly trying to gain an understanding of where the key challenges were, whether or not I could address them, or whether or not I could come up with an alternative plan to work around them until a permanent manager was appointed. But like everything, Ryan, probably the most important. Your role is to make the team effective very, very quickly. And the first training session I ran, I remember it vividly. I probably never prepared for a training session as thoroughly in my life, because I knew how important it was. I had one training session and then we went into a game. And the game, we had one game actually postponed. I think I wouldn't have even had a training session to prepare for that game. The weather saw the game called off. So at that level, you don't actually train as much. I was talking to a friend at a game yesterday, and I think it's a bit of a misunderstood element of the game, that at just below the professional level in the UK, players might be sourced from an hour or 2 hours away, and sometimes it might not be logistically possible for you to actually get the team together to train as much as people might assume. So players might be getting paid £150, £200 a week, but they're not actually travelling to training because logistically it doesn't work. So a lot of the time, it's the management in the non-league semi-professional situation it's about man management, it's about structure and organisation and simplicity, because you don't have many hours on the training ground to get across your key principles. Pre-season is when you do that, in my opinion, in the non-league game. So the training session with them went really well. It was very simple, very clear how we were going to play. And then we gave the players some confidence, and sometimes you get a different voice in the changing room, and it gives everyone a lift. And you're actually quite lucky to take a caretaker role on, because you're in a no-lose situation. You go into an underperforming team, and the only way is up, to be perfectly honest. If you, with the benefit of having some energy and a different voice and some positivity around the place, players generally react really well to that, and that's how we went about it. And we got a draw away at a very difficult team who are significantly higher ranked than us, and it went really well. So it was a great experience. And as I say, I don't think that many people really talk about the role of a caretaker manager very much. I don't think there's been a huge amount of study or scientific kind of research into it. But it's a very enjoyable role, actually, for someone, particularly when in my situation at the time I couldn't commit long term, but it was like I'm given a very defined kind of period of time to go, be the project leader, I suppose. And I loved it. It was a really, really good opportunity.
Well, I guess not having the pressure that a permanent manager has probably helps a little bit.
Absolutely.
Now,
yeah.
You've worked for many years as a coach, so I'm sure you've worked with a lot of youth players. Now, the reality is that not many youth players make it from academy to a professional contract. So what's your advice to footballers so that, if they don't make it professionally, they are not on the streets?
Another great question, a very important question. My advice would be quite simple, really. I think you have to give of your best in everything that you do. So you don't. I think if you it's difficult for the players, depending on the age, for them to reflect on this, because human understanding of how fortunate you are, of the opportunity you're being given, by our very nature, we often don't realise until a long time afterwards. But I would try and explain to a young player, let's say my son, who he finished playing football a couple of years ago, and he now boxes. But when he was playing, I asked him to appreciate the opportunities he'd been given. I tried to help him understand that some of the things that he had experienced as a footballer had benefited him in his development as a human being. And I think gratitude for what you have in life is really, really important. And I think if you can get that across to players, just to take the opportunity that's presented to them there and then, and grab it with both hands. And if they enjoy it, then keep doing it and keep doing more to be better today than you were yesterday, and hopefully have the aspiration to be better tomorrow than you were today. Obviously, I think it's actually more of a question sometimes for parents. I genuinely feel that parents or guardians, people responsible for young people, have such a big responsibility, and this is where I believe football leaders, clubs, coaches have a real responsibility to communicate clearly with parent, set expectations realistically, and also give them a playbook of how to support the work that the club are doing. So, that can be simple things like, obviously, not trying to coach your son, different messages to what the coach is talking about. But it can also be about level setting. What does this actually represent? It represents a great opportunity for your child to go and enjoy themselves and have fun with their friends. If they're good enough, then we're going to support them technically, tactically, preparation, physically, mentally, to progress in the game. And if they're not quite good enough, there's still so many incredible benefits that your child can get from being part of this program. And I think, so it's clear that, a child of 10 or 11 or 12 might not appreciate all that, but the parent should have at least some handle on that, or the guardian, or whoever's responsible for the child. I think as children get older, as players get older, they get to those key decision-making moments. So one thing I neglected to mention before, I worked with professional clubs when I left university. So I was at Reading, Northampton Town, Oxford United and Wycombe Wanderers, actually teaching them. So doing some academic work with the players at the grounds themselves. So I've got a lot of experience of working with young professional footballers, knowing that the majority of them are not going to progress to have a career in the game, and that they need to have a plan B, and they need to start to appreciate that there's a very, very likely outcome here, that you're going to be in the real world needing to earn money from something other than football. At that stage in proceedings, when they're 16, 17, 18, the scholarship age for professional clubs, I think that's when it becomes partly the young players' responsibility as well. I think the younger ages, it's about making sure that they enjoy it. And if they don't enjoy football, go try something else for a bit. Football is not everything. And I think, I'm now not coaching. I haven't coached now since the season before last, 21-22. That's been primarily because of my work has taken me away from being able to commit to a permanent coaching role. And what I see is the importance of having perspective on the game. When you're in the game, it's everything to you. When you're in the cold face, you feel the emotions day in, day out. Ryan, I know how much you do over there in Pune, and you've got so many, you probably take the responsibility of, the importance of the sessions, the importance of the players' development, the importance of certain results in certain scenarios, and you carry all that as a coach. But when you're out of the game, and as a parent as well, it's a lot easier to make sense and apply the right level of content to the game. So football is so important, and it gives a lifeblood to so many of us. It's in my DNA. It always will be. It's one of the first things I think about every day, even now. But what I have to say is it is not everything. And I think if you lose that perspective, then sometimes you lose the ability to advise and support a person in their journey through life, not just through football.
Well, I mean, that's the beauty of football for sure. I also wanted your opinion on one thing, which I've not really got my head around. So if you look at the Premier League, the top 6 coaches, the top 6 clubs, why do you think British coaches don't really get those roles? Why aren't British coaches looked at regularly for those roles? Where do you think British coaches are falling short?
It's such a layered and nuanced subject, because there's so many factors involved now, partly because of the commercial aspects of football, that the rewards, but also the risks are so high. So I think the first thing I would say in response to that, Ryan, is I think that there is a bias. There's a psychological bias from clubs against appointing unproven coaches, and unfortunately, for quite a period of time, I feel like there was a big gap, a generational gap between the coaches. I now believe that England is one of the foremost, if not the foremost, coach education territory in the world. I think it creates great players. So if you go back to 2014, when the England DNA, the FA's DNA project started, and the work that's been done through the age groups, and not just with the players, but the pathways for coaches, I feel like it's created not only an incredible pool of top players. England are now top 1, top 2, top 3 team in the world, and their squad goes down to 30 or 40. There's that many players who are good enough to play in the first 11 players at major tournaments. That's incredible, and that's a consequence of not only good kind of a good pool of players, a good pool of quality to begin with, but it's more so a reflection on the development and on the coaching capability and the methodology behind the coaching. And what that has then done is created so many outstanding young coaches, but I think they have a slightly different view of the world to the generation that came before them. So if you think about Alex Ferguson, you think about, let's say Neil Warnock, Sam Allardyce, the coaches who, were very successful in English football, or relatively successful in English football. I felt you have quite a chasm between that type of coach and the next generation of coach. And perhaps the new generation need to learn a little bit from the old generation as well, because with the exception of Eddie Howe, I don't see anyone who has been able to sustain success in the Premier League. And the perception of success in football is that when you're a manager, is always your last game. And so your last game, you have to perform at a high level for a long period of time to be perceived as successful and anywhere near those top coaches you refer to there. And to be perfectly honest, results don't lie. Eddie Howe at Newcastle has done a very good job, but he still has a job to do to be perceived as a top coach in the upper echelons of the game. So I think it's quite a nuanced subject. I think there's perception, and that's one of the reasons why people aren't willing to take risk. That's linked to the commercial success or otherwise, because if you finish outside the Champions League, positions, then the cost is hundreds of millions. Can you afford to take a risk on a young successful coach who's perhaps working in the Championship or the lower part of the Premier League? I think it's a lot of it is about risk and money. People aren't willing to take risks with managers, and ultimately, I would still say, and I can't put my finger on it, Ryan, but I don't think we're producing enough managers at the top level. And managers are not coaches. Managers are, these days, communicators. They're PR men, they're organisers, they're directors, they're leaders, they're tacticians, they're managers, they're CEOs in some respect, or COOs of a business. And the role of a manager has evolved so much, because of the background and the commercial context of top level football. That I personally think that there's this real distinction between coaches who are very good on the grass and then making that huge step up. And I think that gap is getting wider. I think you need almost an MBA in football business, football communications and PR to be successful at the very top level. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's a problem of ability for sure. It's just, as you said, it's just start trusting your local coaches, basically.
I agree. I mean, I'm interested. Do you see other coaches that you think are ready to make the step up to the Champions League clubs?
Well, I mean, I just believe that when it comes to British coaches, because of how competitive the Premier League is, if you're not really coaching a top 6 team, then it becomes very difficult to win. And because of that, they don't really get the glory that they should be getting. Because, as you said, Sam Allardyce, Eddie Howe, they are phenomenal managers. But just because they've not won trophies, they may not really get that top job. Yeah, but this was a wonderful chat. Now, before I let you go, I'd like you to tell the world about this wonderful WhatsApp group you run for coaches around the world. Ask the Coach.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm not as active on it as I used to be, but Tony Taylor, who is an outstanding football man, great coach. He currently works as a scout for one of the biggest clubs in the world. He asked me to get involved about, I'm going to say 5-6 years ago, something like that. And at the time, it helped me to stay connected with largely the British coaching community, it's expanded to become a global kind of group, and it's a discussion forum. It's actually funny because really a lot of the time you only see the name and the number of the individuals, and that gives you a slightly different perspective, because whilst the opportunity to talk on this is a great example where I get the opportunity to talk football with you, and my face is on here, and my personality probably comes across. This is actually quite impersonal, but what it is focused on the footballing content. And sometimes the discussion on there is just about football current affairs, but sometimes it's help and support for younger coaches who have got challenges they're trying to address. Sometimes it's about sharing content and sharing the right kind of content, which sometimes you'll see on social media channels, but to add a little bit more context in a closed group has been very helpful. The only reason I say it's closed is because it's limited to the number of participants that WhatsApp will enable on there. But I've gained and learned a lot from it over the years, and I've had a lot of people over the years say to me, it's something that that we've all helped to create, which has helped a great deal. But I think there's then been the evolution, and if you look at on Twitter, the Sunday Share group that Lee and Rob run on there is fantastic. I'd encourage anyone interested in coaching, any young coach, any old coach, anyone from any walk of life that who's interested in coaching to have a look on the hashtag Sunday Share on Twitter, because there's an awful lot of really great support being provided. And one of the great things about social media and the world we live in now is that there is a sharing culture. Of course, there's some more negative elements about social media as well, but I've found the coaching community, both the British one and the Spanish and the global coaching community, to really always be willing to support me. There's always people out there who, if I have a question, if I have a challenge that I need a little bit of help with, I've always been able to source that, and likewise I've done the same for other coaches who've been coming through over the years. So it's hopefully it continues to be a useful resource for a lot of people.
You've described the WhatsApp group perfectly. It's a very, very powerful tool. I definitely enjoy being a part of it. So yes, I think this brings us to the end, and I'd like to thank you for giving your time towards this chat. Now this video is going to be on YouTube, it's going to be on Instagram, and there's a lot of Indian coaches are definitely going to be watching this video. Right now it's 2 p.m. so people in India, so coaches are busy with their jobs, but I'm sure once it's evening time, they're all going to just listen to whatever you've said, and you've really said some great things, some great insights. Thank you for being on the show.
Ryan, thank you for giving me the opportunity. It's been a pleasure to come on and talk football with you, and congratulations on everything you're achieving over there. I follow what you do, and you're spreading the gospel of football incredibly well, and impacting so many people, both young players and coaches over there. So really great job, and good luck with everything.